Just days after the UN Security Council demanded a 30-day ceasefire across Syria, bombing and shelling has resumed in eastern Ghouta with more death. Frustrated, the UN demanded the immediate implementation of the ceasefire. However, there is no enforcement or clear consequences for any party that violates the truce, and no credible timetable to turn the temporary truce into a long-term one.
Security Council resolutions are only meaningful if they are effectively implemented. And that is why I expect the resolution to be immediately implemented and sustained, particularly to ensure the immediate, safe, unimpeded and sustained delivery of humanitarian aid and services, the evacuation of the critically sick and the wounded, and the alleviation of the suffering of the Syrian people.
Certainly the resolution that was recently passed to mandate the provision of humanitarian aid in eastern Ghouta, for example, is welcome, although really shouldn't be necessary to tell the warring parties to do what they're already required to do under international humanitarian law, the laws of armed conflict, that humanitarian aid is non-negotiable. It shouldn't be treated as a bargaining chip or a tool of war.
According to monitors, on March 5th, the regime targeted East Ghouta with 189 airstrikes, 413 guided missiles, and 21 barrel bombs, including one loaded with chlorine gas. 93 civilians were killed, and 4 died due to their injuries from recent bombings. Instead of military intervention, what Syrian people really want is a peaceful homeland, but their voices are not being heard.
The people's demanding for 3 things at first, but the first one, number one priority, is to end the bombing, to stop the bombing, to stop every military action on the ground, on the sky, wherever itself, and then allow the humanitarian aid to be entered to Ghouta, like by United Nations, by any kind of NGO, humanitarian NGO, to enter Ghouta and deliver aids and medical convoys, because people are in need of that. And the third is evacuate medical cases. So unfortunately, what's happening, maybe media, maybe also United Nations is reading this in a different way. Is reading this as a humanitarian evacuation. And humanitarian evacuation in a term of Assad and Russia, it means internally forced displaced, like exactly what happened with Aleppo.
Syria has been engulfed in a war since 2011 after Syrian President Bashar al-Assad lost control over large parts of the country to multiple revolutionary groups. The war has become endless with the intervention of regional and world powers, including Iran, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the US. Eastern Ghouta has been under siege by the Syrian government since 2013, and is the last rebel stronghold near the capital. 805 civilians, including at least 178 children, have been killed since Russia-backed Syrian forces launched an assault on the besieged enclave outside Damascus on February 18th. The UN is working to resolve this complicated situation from a position where all countries involved fundamentally want the same thing, which is an end to hostilities and the prevention of human suffering. But all of the parties involved in Syria have different demands to be satisfied before they are willing to end the war.
We would definitely say that the Council is totally incapable of upholding their responsibility to maintain international peace and security in Syria.
The problem is, what I see is the international community and like that, they only look at the situation as a political situation and try to figure out in a political way and try to negotiate by Geneva I, Asatana, and Suchi now. So we have more and more series and scenarios, that it's not even possible. If you see how many meetings they had during these 7 years, you will see like, wow, after all these years, they didn't have only one solution of all of that. But the solution is really simple, is really in front of our eyes, is stop the bombing. it's not a political ask, it's a humanitarian ask, because the bombing is falling not on rebellions, not on terrorists or something. It's falling with evidence. It's falling on civilians.
The UN and the UN Security Council isn't willing to put in place consequences when human rights law, when law of armed conflict is not respected. And they do have a very clear tool to, which is that of criminal accountability for those who violate, for those responsible for crimes against humanity, for war crimes. And that's not just necessarily just the Syrian government. It also applies to all of the parties involved in the conflict.
Which is one of the biggest difficulties that we see in Syria, is there, because of the structure of the UN Security Council and the fact that one of the permanent members of the Security Council is essentially a party to the conflict, protecting the government of Syria. It has been very, very difficult for the international community to take action through the UN Security Council, especially on issues of accountability. And that's definitely created a culture of impunity.
The UN plays a vital role as a deliverer of humanitarian aid on the ground, but it did only as much as all of the worrying factors allowed it to do. A 46-truck convoy carrying humanitarian aid entered eastern Ghouta on Monday through a government-controlled checkpoint for the first time in nearly a month. However, soon, the convoy cut short its mission and left the area amid shelling.
And the UN is obviously involved in provision of humanitarian aid, which is hugely important and critical. They have to continue doing that. Obviously involved in trying to end the conflict.
It's super good that they are working, because there's a lot of people who's been displaced from other areas, and they are based in regime territories and regime areas, and they need help. So, but the problem is the regime is only allowing these NGOs to work only in his side, in his areas, to do rehabilitation, to do reconstruction and like that, in these areas, but not to go into rebels area. I'm just afraid that, and most of the civilians, because I talked to my friends, they told me they feel like this kind of convoy, it's just a distraction. So the regime could continue bombing, like, look, we are helping you, look, we are sending, we're being neutral, we are helping, we're being neutral by sending humanitarian aid, but still we are advancing.
Maintain international peace and security, protect human rights, deliver humanitarian aid, promote sustainable development, and uphold international law. These are 5 ambitions for the United Nations to achieve. To get a sense of if the UN is functioning effectively in the world today, we have to look to Syria, where, after 7 years, a nightmarish conflict still rages with thousands of people killed, millions exiled, and internally displaced.
It's so important for me to send this message so people will know exactly what's their demand, because we are not manipulating them or tell them like, yo, don't leave. No. Yes, they are suffering, they are getting killed and like that, all of that, but still they don't want to leave, because not only because they love their land and they don't want to leave it, and they've been there for 5 years now in a siege, but also because they have another examples and experience from Aleppo, Daraya, Homs. They got displaced into Idlib.
We work very closely with a number of member states on kind of veto restraint initiatives. I don't think it's likely anytime soon to see the abolition of the veto in the Security Council, but we support and advocate on behalf of the ACT group, which has a code of conduct that states can sign, pledging not to vote against any resolution in the Security Council that is addressing or responding or preventing mass atrocities. There are not a lot of positive things to look forward to in Syria. I think so much of that is because of the Security Council and the inability of the UN to take action, largely because of one member state, which is really kind of shameful. I think it's going to be a long road ahead. I think we have to keep calling for a political solution. I think there really is no military solution to this conflict, even though, clearly the Syrian government and its allies see one. But I think that that's very unrealistic. And really a political solution is the only way forward. So we will continue to put pressure on all the parties to the conflict. There are, the European Union, the United States, the countries of the Gulf, they do have power, and there does need to be leverage held on the Russians.
If the Security Council simply made that referral in a day, the calculus of all of the actors would change immediately. You would almost certainly see a marked reduction in suffering if that happened.
It's not enough to send one paper 2 weeks ago and say, yeah, here you go, we give you this resolution, and look, we are with you, and we just demanding to regime and Russia to do it. But you have to push for your demands to be actioned on the ground, not only just to send a piece of paper to regime.